Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's webinar. We have a great presentation lined up for you today, but before we get started, there are just a few general admin points to cover. First and foremost, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and we will share them with our speakers. Second, if you experience any audio-visual issues during the programme, please let us know by using that same question tool, and a member of our admin team will be on hand to support you. And finally, just to note, today's session is being recorded and we'll be sharing a copy with you via email in the coming days. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our speakers to get us started.
Thank you very much, Jordan, and welcome everybody. This is a webinar hosted by Bristows and Lexology with the understated title of Will AI Save the World from Another Pandemic? My name is Chris Holder. I am a partner in the Bristows Commercial IT department. I have been an IT lawyer for the best part of 30 years now and been working in the AI and robotics space for the last 5 years. Alex, what have you been up to?
Thanks, Chris. My name is Alex Denoon. I'm a partner at Bristows in the regulatory team, life sciences regulatory. We do life sciences regulatory all day, every day. I've been doing it for nearly as long as Chris, quarter of a century, I guess. And we do a huge amount of AI work at the moment. It's really a burgeoning area and a very exciting area. Thank you, Chris.
Well done. Yeah, Alex and I work together quite a lot on this intersection, if you like, between life sciences and technology. And it is indeed a burgeoning area. So let me take you through the agenda. And Jordan, if you're listening, could you also put up the poll? Thank you. So the agenda that we're going to go through is, first off, have a quick discussion on what is artificial intelligence. What is AI's impact on the medical devices sector? How was AI used during the very recent ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and what was its impact? Then we'll look at the current legal framework and have a discussion as to whether the use of AI is being facilitated or impeded by the current legal framework. And then finally, what are the repercussions of the use of AI on future regulation? We are also planning on having time for the questions and answers at the end of this. But if you could look at that poll and give your view, that would be great. We'll come back to that question later on. So, what is artificial intelligence? And what is not AI? Gone through one too many. So on the 8th of March, a report by the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, the CDEI, was produced entitled Reflecting on the Use of AI and Data-Driven Technology in the Pandemic. CDEI is an independent committee of cross-industry experts set up by Her Majesty's Government to advise on how the UK can benefit from data-driven technology, and is part of a working party of 32 regulators and organisations to consider the AI-related issues. Now, this entity looked at the way that AI and data-driven technology played a role in response to the response to COVID-19. The interesting thing about that, and this is why the poll will be very prescient, is how has that impacted and how do people view AI? And in order to understand what AI is and how it impacted, you need to go back to the definition of what artificial intelligence actually is. Now, April 21st this year, the Commission adopted a proposal for the regulation on AI intelligence systems, which is described as the first ever legal framework on AI. Now, this is a long time in the making. The Commission's been working on this area for the last 7 years. In September 2014, it produced a report on the regulation of robotics, the so-called Robo-Law project. And over the course of the last 7 years, there's been lots of developments, lots of announcements, lots of white papers. And the most recent one, this framework on AI, has had an attempt at describing and defining what AI is. What it has come up with is the following, and I shall read this. It is software that is developed with one or more of the techniques and approaches listed in Annex 1, don't worry about that for the moment, and can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, generate outputs such as content, predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing the environments that they interact with. Ordinarily, going back before this was this report was produced, a traditional definition of what AI is would have been a series of computing techniques designed to imitate human behavior. That's the definition I've been working off really for the last few years. But this definition, I think, is about the first time that any type of government or any type of intra-governmental body like the Commission, it has produced something that makes sense. And the reason that I said we'd come back to Annex 1 is that in Annex 1, it talks about techniques and approaches, machine learning approaches, logic and knowledge-based approaches, including knowledge representation, logic program, knowledge databases, inference and deductive machines. And these are all very, very technical computing terms which are being used now to look at the difference between software, shall we say, and artificial intelligence stroke machine learning. The real problem, and the real problem has been in what is artificial intelligence, is it's been used across many different discipline. And when I said in 2014 the Robo Law project was the start of the Commission's interest in this area, AI, the term artificial intelligence, really did leap across a vast range of topics, including robotics, which was really subsumed into the AI thing. And AI became synonymous with basically anything from a Terminator robot to software that you could interact with over a telephone and find out what your bank account balance was. So it is important, really important now that we can understand what the regulators, potential regulators, and lawmakers are looking at as defining what is artificial intelligence. What is not artificial intelligence, I would suggest, are things like data analytics, big data, automated machines. And when I say that, I'm really thinking about machines that do not change their functionality as they perform their normal tasks. Computer hardware, software, the internet. Individually, none of that is artificially intelligent, but working together and using some of the techniques that are set out in the new AI regulation, you can see which way this is going. And I think that the recent definition is really helpful for us all to look at what AI is.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
I think that one of the ways that might be helpful to think about this is most of the things that you listed as to what AI isn't would fit into a conventional scientific analysis of if X, then Y. Yep. So all other things being equal, provided that this particular input is put out, you'll always get the same output. Yes. I think AI systems, the particularly interesting and challenging thing about it is it can change over time. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that's the only touchstone, but all other things being equal, if X, you won't always get Y coming out the end. I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And that's the thing that scares regulators, that things might not be predictable in terms of this. Sorry.
No, very good, thank you. Which leads us on, if I can work the buttons on this, to the next slide, which is, I think, how is AI in its various forms changing the medical devices sector? Because, of course, AI as a technology is used across many sectors, in fact, all sectors. It will permeate society and virtually everything that we do. But in relation to the medical devices sector, Alex, how do you think AI has been changing what you have been working on over the course of the last 25 years?
Well, I think one of the truly extraordinary things that happened was late last year. So in November 2020, Google's DeepMind AlphaFold program solved, I think unequivocally and categorically solved the problem of protein folding that had defeated the best and brightest human minds using the most sophisticated conventional IT system for decades. So this breakthrough last year, I think, means that it's no longer possible to say, well, it's a gross generalization, but I'm going to say it anyway. AI has proven to be able to outmaneuver, outthink, outproblem solve the brightest human minds on serious problems. So I think categorically AI is profoundly, has now been shown to have a profound ability to solve genuinely intractable complex problems, and crucially, imaginatively. The headline in Nature at that time said, "It will change everything." And I think that's probably fair. So I think you can tell what my answer to the question about saving the world from the next pandemic will be when we come to answer that question. But virtually all large players in the life sciences sector currently have large-scale AI programs, or at the very minimum are investing in AI initiatives. And this includes pharmaceutical, biotech companies, conventional medical device and diagnostic companies, and companies working on more challenging issues like genomics. And for what it's worth, there are already a number of approved CE-marked AI medical devices on the market. One of the most notable and well-known is a product called Streams that is used by various NHS clinicians to diagnose the life-threatening condition acute kidney injury from patients' real-time health records. So there's a real-time data stream, and Streams, the AI system, reads it and gives suggestions to the clinicians about what's going to happen with this fairly horrifying condition, AKI. The clinicians at Imperial College said that Streams was saving them up to 2 hours a day. So it's already being deployed. It's not what is it going to do, it's already quite pervasive. So AI technology, in my view, promises to benefit virtually every aspect of healthcare and life sciences. So I'll just race through a little shopping list, but AI systems that interpret medical images have been repeatedly shown to be as good as, if not better than, radiologists. An example of that was an article in Lancet last October, which mentioned that, well, which concluded that AI systems have higher sensitivity, particularly in detecting subtle lesions. So it's clearly being used to interrogate images better than highly skilled radiologists. Drug discovery, we see that very pervasive, everything from screening new molecules, re-interrogating existing data sets, identifying unusual genetic correlations, or even designing new proteins. So we see all of those. Another area where we see quite a lot of it is identification of possible adverse events or disease outbreaks from reported data, including reports on social media. Now, Chris particularly enjoys sewage, and we'll come back to Chris's enthusiasm for sewage in a second, but the AI systems can identify correlations that others would never have looked for or noticed. That doesn't necessarily mean that correlation is causation, but that is very interesting. And obviously, again, Chris will get excited about bioinformaticians in a minute, but let's just keep going. So AI systems will be crucial to the concept of personalized medicine that has been promised for a while and can be deployed in the context of companion diagnostics, dose management systems, which genuinely tailor therapeutic treatment to the individual in real time rather than waiting for data at the end. Data analysis and modeling, we see a lot there in AI to reduce the number of people who have to participate in clinical trials and the length of clinical trials. And again, it seems to outperform some of the real world data, which is quite terrifying or quite impressive. AI can also be used to assess an individual's polygenic risk score, and that is determined using a patient's genome to determine their risk of a particular disease, heart disease, cancer, ALS. And these systems have already been deployed in the NHS for some years, and reimbursed by NICE. So they've gone through a cost benefit analysis from NICE, and they've been used since 2018, some of them. And virtually all of those currently use or are in the process of starting to use AI systems. AI systems which can identify whether a particular patient is at risk of developing a certain medical condition based on their health records. So again, a risk profile. AI systems that can identify potential clinical trial subjects, and then lots of kind of doctor in the pocket AI programs. And the reason that I went through that shopping list isn't just because I think it's an extraordinarily broad shopping list, but we, Chris and I, are working with clients in all of those sectors today, working on projects for these matters today. So how is AI changing the sector? I think it's already being widely deployed. I think there will be challenges in getting approvals out the end for a number of these products, but it's actually already more pervasive than you might realize in the real world.
And is that, Alex, is that the narrower version or the narrower definition of AI that I look at, you know, this computing techniques thing, or is it the wider?
Some of it will be and some of it won't be. So you're right. Something that looks at an individual's polygenic risk score, that's predetermining which particular genes you're going to go looking for. Yep. And so that is, as you say, a kind of a narrower definition of AI. However, some of them where it's more in the kind of drug discovery and early stage work, that really is looking for correlations no one else had really thought of. And speculating about interesting correlations, investigating the correlation, and then reaching a conclusion about that. Now, going back to your favorite new profession, bioinformaticians, you obviously are going to need bioinformaticians to actually decipher what the AI system is telling you, because there will be false correlations without cause or mistaken correlations. And that, I think, if I was going to recommend someone going to university now, I would say I think that's going to be a huge problem going forward, that we don't have enough people who genuinely understand data science and genuinely understand the biology to be able to then work with the AI systems. I think the AI systems will spit out a huge amount of interesting things. What we do with them and how we utilize the outputs they're generating will be challenging. So going back to the broad question, will AI systems solve the pandemic? Well, not on their own. They'll need actual people to actually work out what to do with it. You can't just run DeepMind on how to solve the pandemic and then get it to spit out an answer. However, I think in terms of the power that it can deliver, it's truly extraordinary and already quite pervasive.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you, Alex. I mean, okay, so far we've looked at what is artificial intelligence, how is it different from normal computing. We've looked at the medical devices sector and to see how we're getting along with how AI is utilized and the impact it has. And now we can look at how was AI utilized in the battle and against COVID-19. So there are the poll results, and the poll results, if I can move that thing so I can see them. Do you think that AI played a leading role in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic? 67% of the audience said yes, 33% said no. That is a very interesting statistic, mainly because in the report, and if we can go back to the slide, Jordan, in the report that the CDEI I mentioned earlier, reflecting on the use of AI and data-driven technology, in that report, the conclusion that the CDEI came to was that AI did in fact not play any significant or outsized role in the relief effort. And actually, if you looked at what the CDEI said and the way that they had defined what AI is, the real role of AI in the COVID-19 pandemic was virtually non-existent. So why do I say that? The top theme that emerged was really that conventional data analysis was at the heart of the current COVID-19 response. Of all the things that the CDI came up with, it was data analytics, looking at the amount of information that was being provided to health centres, the government, clinicians, the government quangos. All of that data existed, and it was reformulated, it was transferred, it was analysed at length. And the role of computers in that was that, yes, there was a lot of data on databases. Yes, computers and the new software and the speed of chips can help someone get through an enormous amount of data very, very quickly. But it was human analysis of that data that led to policy. It was not a situation where artificial intelligence or machine learning based systems were telling people what to do. And I think that is a really important distinction, especially when you look at the surveys that were done and the results of those surveys that the CDI came up with themselves. Now, we've got our poll, 67%. Yes, it played a huge part of the COVID-19 response. So let me share this with you. 72% of the UK population felt that digital technology had the potential to be used in the COVID-19 response. That's a good thing. 42% thought that digital technology was making things better. Yeah, understand that. 7% said it was making things worse. Now that's interesting. Trust in data governance was a key indicator as to whether anyone thought digital technology had a role to play. 43% of those asked thought the right rules and regulations were properly in place. 24% disagreed. There was a split on an age basis of 40% of younger people felt well informed about how digital technology was used during the pandemic, and 55% of people over 55 disagreed, which is not that surprising. So through the report, I think there were a few things that really leapt out at me. Certainly trust in technology, and I think that is going to be a theme that certainly through the next few years, trust in the technology, trust in how data is acquired, how data is stored, how data is used, and what happens as a result of the interrogation of that data. The trust the population have in that process is going to be key to the adoption of artificially intelligent and machine learning based systems. Not just doctors crunching data, clinicians crunching data, machines crunching data, and coming up with a decision or a way forward based upon that data. I think you mentioned, Alex, that what was the term? Bioinformaticians. Bioinformaticians. That's it. Yeah. The ability of people to understand and interpret what is coming through these types of programs, especially in the life sciences sector, I think will be key. It'll be very interesting to see, and I know that HMG and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport have made a lot about the need for training on the STEM subjects, training in data science, training in computing. This new level of how do you interpret what you are seeing in front of you across all sectors will be vital, I think, and it plays into the trust. If society trusts what it's being told to do, then it will follow the lead from government and policy, which is, interestingly enough, it's going to be the subject of a Bristows Life Sciences Summit later on in the year, details of which, I think more details of which will be supplied at the end of this seminar, but details are on the Bristows website as well. But that will go into a very in-depth discussion about how we deal with AI, how we trust it, how it develops, what are the big challenges in place.
Can I ask a slightly difficult or slightly polemic question at this juncture? Given that governments around the world said that they were going to follow the science at the beginning of this, so if we go back in our time machine 12 months or so, they said we're definitely going to do what the scientists tell us, and then we can all debate the extent to which they did that. Why didn't they say we're going to do, they quite clearly were saying we're going to follow what the scientists are telling us, They didn't say we're going to follow the data. Yeah, they didn't say, or data. They didn't say that we're going to trust the computers to solve this for us. Yep. Do you think that come the next pandemic in 5 years' time, they will still be saying we're going to trust the scientists, we're going to follow the science? Or do you think they'll be saying we're going to trust the data and we're going to trust a very clever system that can tell us what's the best, when to close down, when to lock down, when to unlock, when to vaccinate, when not to vaccinate?
Well, yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I think we've seen that move from the start of the pandemic. We are going to trust the scientists to a situation in the last few months, which is we are going to be led by the data and not the dates. So I think there is perversely a shift through just the year that we've had through the pandemic, is a shift from we must trust what human beings are telling us because they are the scientists and they've got lots and lots of degrees from great universities, to actually, without the ability to crunch vast amounts of data, the knowledge that these people have can be dwarfed by some of the applications that we are seeing being displayed. And let me get on to sewage, Alex, because I know you like me talking about this. Now, if we go back to the question, will AI save us in the next pandemic? Well, here's the thing. I don't. If the next pandemic happens within a year, I think the answer will be no. But over the course of the next few years, when we're going to have a joined up system of the Internet of Things, the gathering of data, the analysis of data, and the outputs and the red lights, the warning flags of what may be happening, this is where AI and data analysis will come together. It happened again during this pandemic that people were looking at, health officials in this country were looking at sewage, and they were looking for traces of the COVID-19 virus within sewage plants. Those areas that had the largest COVID-19 virus population in the sewage were those, funny enough, those were the areas that had the most COVID-19. Now let's think about the ability to analyze through sensors data that is flooding through our sewage pipes, and look at the ability of computers and computing to apply those techniques of analysis and interpretation. And let's think about the red flags for the next pandemic, because if anything is going to happen, it's going to be happening in the sewage and what is happening out there to our population. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that we will get red flags about pandemic situations because of what is going on in the sewage plants and the pipes around cities all over the world. And that's just one indicator of a data source that will be utilized. There you go. I've got my sewage thing in.
Yeah, without trying to be controversial about it, I also think that no pun intended, raw data or wet data information will also be correlated with fuzzier data regarding people's social media feeds and who's feeling ill, and that kind of reporting from a soft end, I think, will also be correlated with the data from the hard end. And because the sewage system may well lead to false conclusions if you're not correlating it with other things as well. And it's that ability that I think, and the ability to try and identify correlations that then someone has to think about. But I think that the touchstone that you referred to before about trust, I don't think that at the beginning of this pandemic, politicians were going to say, the populace will trust me if I say we're just going to look at the data and we've got a couple of very clever computer systems that are thinking about it. I just don't think that would have resonated in the same way that we'll trust someone with a white coat as opposed to the computer spitting out the answer and telling them what to do. Now, I don't know that the people with the white coat actually did have particularly definitive recommendations. I think there were various recommendations that came out, and we know that they were all subject to political issues. They had to respond to the political environment in which they were speaking, but I don't think that we've got to that stage yet. So I think in order for AI to be able to truly deliver on its extraordinary potential, and as I mentioned earlier, I think it is almost limitless, a lot of this potential. I think it really does have to move to a position where there is a much better confidence in the outputs that are coming, and also trust in terms of people donating their data on the inwards as well. So I think trust is a word we're going to hear more and more often in the AI sector, and quite rightly.
Agreed. Which does bring us rather neatly when it comes to a view on trust as to what and how the legal framework, the current legal framework, does that help or hinder the use of AI in the health tech sector? Now, I would look at this from the basis that you've got to understand what AI is, because if you're going to regulate artificial intelligence, you really do need to understand what it is. So I applaud what has come through from the Commission. That makes a lot of sense to me. The difference, I think, from the continental approach to the UK approach is around flexibility. And I think our common law approach does provide an inherent flexibility because it does move with the times. So the tort of negligence, what is negligent, or what was negligent in 1901 is no longer negligent in 1921, let alone 2021. And so the law, the common law, can provide guidance around the legal framework and the use of artificial intelligence systems in not only the health sector, but also elsewhere. What I don't think is a great idea is, and this is probably looking at future repercussions for future regulation, is a one-size-fits-all robot law, for want of a better phrase, an artificial intelligence law. So I think each individual industrial sector needs to look at how artificial intelligence is being used within its sector to understand whether the current legal framework that operates within that sector has to be changed or not, tinkered with a lot or not at all. Alex, from a medical device specific sector, what do you think around existing legal framework? How has the framework dealt with technology generally, the move from the scalpel to the information grabbing application, which is on someone's wrist, providing information back to a doctor?
In my view, the regulatory frameworks that we currently have actually withstood the challenges of the pandemic and the challenges of wave after wave of technological advancement quite well. So I think that the current regulatory framework that we have provides multiple opportunities for what our regulator in the UK called regulatory flexibilities in response to the pandemic. And so there are lots of opportunities in the current framework for the regulator to provide a degree of cover or provide some kind of mechanism for untested products to come to the market in response to to an emergency like the pandemic. So during the pandemic, the regulators who were willing to use these powers, such as the MHRA, in my view, genuinely shone, and they enabled the approval of thousands of ventilators which could be deployed, as well as multiple other medical devices on an exceptional basis. And if you have a skilled regulator with a tool that enables them to be able to accommodate and flex, at least to some extent, then I think that works very, very well. And genuinely, I was impressed with how responsive the regulator was. So, for example, if you wanted an exception for your unproven medical device in response to the pandemic, by and large, the MHRA would review and respond to your request within 2 days, which is quite startling. Other jurisdictions where there was less flexibility, and so, for example, some continental European regulators who said, what they're going to do is encourage the medical device notified bodies to be prompt and try and give emergency approvals for the product. Well, that didn't work for love nor money. So when you have rigid systems and you try and put a challenging framework into a rigid system, a challenging demand into a rigid system, they don't work. So I think the statutory powers to provide for regulatory flexibilities that were used during the pandemic, it really did shine. And the UK has recently adopted something called the Medicines and Medical Devices Act, which I can criticise for various different grounds, but it will enable the government to further amend the regulatory regime promptly. And during the parliamentary debates on this 2001 Act, the Medicines and Medical Devices Act, the health ministers emphasised the government's intention, the UK government's intention, to further amend things, and in particular to promote innovation in the medical devices space, including specifically with respect to AI. So these powers could enable a genuinely bespoke regulatory regime for the medical device and diagnostic software, including AI in Great Britain. So the UK is very, very keen to avoid becoming a dumping ground by virtue of having left the European Union, and much more to be a proving ground for new technologies, and has stated it intends to adopt an NIMBLO regulatory framework. So I think the existing framework, with empowered and brave regulators, given a degree of political cover, I think has actually by and large helped. Whether it will go back to a slightly more calcified approach after the pandemic, we all hope not, but it's wait and see there. So many regulators, including both the FDA and the MHRA, have stated that they are not ideologically opposed to AI, in particular the black box element of it, or the dynamic element of it, the all other things being equal, if X then Y. The fact that it might not always spit Y out has not posed an inherent problem for the regulators. So they have said, provided you can explain what's changing and monitor what's changing through a quality management system and a risk management plan, they're actually accommodating of these systems, as we've seen by products already on the market. So whilst the regulatory framework is challenging, our clients are not experiencing insurmountable regulatory challenges navigating the framework, and by and large have found a receptive ear with regulators. Genuinely, the biggest issue that in the medical devices sector my clients are experiencing is finding sufficiently skilled notified bodies and regulatory consultants who can help them prepare and review the dossiers necessary to support the approval, the CE marking of the devices. And this is a very significant challenge that the European industry will face when the proposed EU AI regulation takes effect. The fact that we're going to create a whole new category scares me witless. Sorry,
you would have thought that if you are going to produce a regulation that is going to impact upon the life sciences and health sectors, by introducing all these notified bodies and lots of people who are going to opine about the usefulness or not of your product, that they would have enough people, enough qualified people in order to make this work. That's what I would have thought.
Or even any.
Well, that would help.
Yeah, any would be a good start, I think. And the difficulties that the medical device sector has experienced with the medical device regulation, which, as you know, takes effect in 20 days, and the in vitro diagnostic medical device regulation scares me witless in terms of this. But we do hope that the MHRA will adopt a conditional approval regime for medical devices and IVDs, much like, to its credit, the regulatory sandbox concept introduced in the proposed regulation and the approach that we use in medicines for difficult products where we haven't got enough data. So a conditional approval. And that should enable regulators to have a controlled testing environment for innovative AI systems. And I'm genuinely optimistic that this will be the case. Obviously, it will be interesting to see how much influence this regulation impacts the UK. Will the UK decide to get on board with this, or strike its own direction remains to be seen. But I'm really excited about the future, and I think the existing frameworks can accommodate quite readily.
Okay, well, let's talk about the future. What are the repercussions for the use of AI in the future? What is the relationship going to be like between tech and life sciences? And we can answer that question, or try and answer that question, as will AI save us from the next pandemic? So in relation to the repercussions of the use of AI in future regulation, let's look at what the UK government's been up to. So from January 2021, the UK AI Council published HMG's AI roadmap, which recommended that HMG develop and implement an AI strategy. Now, that AI strategy has been around for a few years, so it's another AI strategy, I would suggest. One of the 4 recommendations in the report was to develop robust and flexible regulation resulting in good governance, and there's that word again, trust. The UK needs to develop, it says, a world-class enabling environment with strong but flexible legislation and well-resourced, capable regulators able to provide responsive guidance and timely oversight. And I think, Alex, that is really a hark back to what we were talking about in relation to the notified bodies. It also mentions that the healthcare industry specifically is one of the areas where AI adoption would advance public and private sector confidence in its use. However, it didn't provide much detail around this, unfortunately. The DCMS, in the form of Digital Secretary Oliver Dowden, announced in March that there should be a new AI strategy to unleash the transformational power of artificial intelligence. So in a long line of government ministers heralding what is the future responsibility of AI, which is to save us all from everything, Mr. Dowden has gone to exactly the point on the transformational abilities or potential of artificial intelligence. The government is going to focus on the economic growth via widespread use of AI, ethical, safe and trustworthy development of AI, and resilience in the face of change via an emphasis on skills, talent and research and development. So something really, Alex, that we've been talking about for a very long time in another white paper as another strategy document for the UK to follow. Has this added anything to the debate over the course of the last few years? I would say not. Has that particular report emphasised the importance of AI to change and transformation in this country and abroad? Absolutely. So it has. Will it save us from the next pandemic? Well, before we get into that, I think we've got some questions and answers after this session, and I know that we've just seen a question flick up on the screen from Zach, and I can read that out in a minute. But for all those others out there who'd like to ask some questions, please use the chat function or the questions. I think it's the questions function in the software, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. But Alex, your thoughts on the repercussions of the use of AI on future regulation? What do you think? What do you think might happen? What do you anticipate will be the key challenges faced by manufacturers of AI medical devices in the future? Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, certainty. So if I'm developing an AI system now, whether it be based on in vitro data or other data, so it's a medical device, I already have to reconcile GDPR and whichever medical device regulatory framework I'm working with, MDR, IVDR, whichever it is. So I've got these 2 issues that sometimes pull me in different directions. So the data regulators will say data minimization, purpose limitation, hold as little data as possible for as short a period as possible. And the medical device regulators will say hold as much data as possible for as long as possible for purposes we don't yet know. So you've already got a natural tension here. The new regulatory framework sitting on top is going to then pull people in 3 different directions at once. And that is going to pose really serious concerns. So whatever comes new needs to be capable of being reconciled with the existing. Yep. And I would like to see something whereby there's some kind of prioritization or some mechanism for trying to get inconsistencies or tensions resolved. I think that's going to be a huge problem. the complete absence of notified bodies in relation to AI scares me witless, and I'm afraid the medical device notified bodies simply don't have enough bandwidth to be able to pick up the slack. So perhaps I'll jump forward and then backward again. In the strongest possible terms, everyone here at Bristows would encourage all stakeholders in the industry to work with the Commission, and for that matter, other governments, to work on new regulatory frameworks and knock some of the sharper edges off proposed legislation to try and make it as workable as possible and as flexible as possible, to try and eliminate areas for uncertainty. So that would be where I would see, in terms of a regulatory approach to this, stuff drafted enthusiastically but without working out how someone can actually comply with it is really a very sad, that would be a sad learning from what we've seen in the last 18 months, where I think we've actually had appropriate frameworks to deal with all this. The other point that you mentioned earlier about trust, one needs to have secure and trusted data sets that you're reading into. And I think the UK is also very enthusiastic about creating those kind of data sets. So the proposal in relation to genomics that came out of the government last year, and talking about trying to make more and more government-funded data sets available. The idea that we're planning on doing a whole genome sequence on up to 500,000 Britons and making all of that data available to try and help fast track a lot of this. So you've got a trusted data set and you've got a trusted regulatory framework to be able to use and manipulate that data set. I think poses a great deal, it shows the extraordinary opportunities that can be delivered. I would hope that there isn't too much uncertainty generated by over-enthusiastic regulation. And I'm afraid if there is a lot of very enthusiastic regulation that serves as impediments or simply generates uncertainty, to address Zach's question, I think that, well, anyway, I think that's going to be a particular challenge and will lead people, as we have already seen with GDPR, people to do difficult and interesting longitudinal projects, I'm afraid often are doing it outside GDPR environments in the Middle East, in various different places. We've seen a lot of very interesting projects leave as a result of uncertainty. So if there's too much uncertainty, I don't think it will stop AI. It will result in AI being generated in less strictly regulated environments, would be my thought on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think from a general application, you know, how do we go about regulating AI in the future? I think the Commission's proposed artificial intelligence regulation has its good points. I mentioned earlier the definition of AI, but I think it also has some problems, and the problems I would see really relate to this attempt to create a horizontal piece of legislation that regulates AI without looking at the sectors and how its use within those sectors differs. So, for example, it's always a great idea to ban harmful practices, and that is something that comes through from the regulation. It's going to ban certain AI practices, for example, deploying subliminal techniques in order to materially distort a person's behavior. That sort of thing does seem like a good idea. But there are certain other areas where they're looking to ban AI practices that actually you would think within the defense sector, for example, that might not be a good idea. And so they need to be quite careful how they implement that. Categorizing high-risk AI systems by reference to the implications of that AI system, I think can only be done on a sector-by-sector basis. I think, again, the horizontal approach is problematical, but when we get into the difference between AI used in the medical devices regulations and the motor vehicles approval and market surveillance regulation, for example, there might be parallels. I know that from a product liability perspective, the Commission is looking very much to look at its current product liability portfolio and there will be a complete and utter overhaul of that based upon AI and the implications of products that use AI for the purposes of the audience. There is a real problem when it comes down to defining a product, because the whole point about artificial intelligence and machine learning particularly is that the product changes its functionality as it learns. So what it starts off at from a functional perspective on the marketplace on day one may not necessarily be what it will be like in day 10, day 50, day 100, etc. So something like that will definitely need to be worked through. It does introduce future regulation, and in the form of this AI proposal, does introduce a vast array of safety requirements put upon economic actors within society. So not just manufacturers, but distributors, retailers, and even customers, purchasers. And it also introduces the concept of effectively the equivalent of a data protection officer, someone within an organization that looks at how AI is being manufactured or used. There will be a function within an organization that will say, well, what's it being used for? What is it, this product? Is it AI? What's it being used for? And is it safe? You know, that's certainly a job creation scheme, if you like. And it also goes on to finally talks about the new institutions that will be coming along as a result of all of this potential regulation. So, will AI save us?
Can I jump? Sorry, I was going to ask. Someone asked a question there. Can I ask and answer that question? Someone said,
yes.
We discussed existing legal framework for devices cope fairly well, but what about the existing legal framework for clinical trials to leverage AI to accelerate drug development? Do I think that the clinical trial regulatory framework needs review? Yes, it does. The concepts in the clinical trial regulatory framework are sufficiently flexible to accommodate more innovative approaches, and I've seen some very interesting data in relation to people who've been able to do data modeling and thereby abbreviate clinical trials and abbreviate the number of people in clinical trials, not eliminate them. But I think it needs an active program to work with the people who authorize clinical trials, and also the regulators who approve products coming out, whether they be medicines, medical devices, or in vitro diagnostics. So I don't know that we need to throw out the existing regulatory framework, but we need to build in a lot more flexibility into it. And if I'm frank, understanding by the decision makers. Sorry, Chris.
No, I'm going on to the questions. You interrupted me at exactly the right time. So you've answered one of them. Another question from Amanda on AI employment. There is the risk of indirect sex or disability discrimination. In addition, there is an issue of how you prove a discrimination claim if AI rather than the person has made a decision about you. How do you see the use of AI in decision making on people? I think I see that there will definitely be categories of AI and the use of AI and how data is acquired and what that data is used for that will be banned. I know that the European Union is looking at how toys, for example, that use artificial intelligence within their systems and collect data about children, that type of approach will be heavily regulated. Similarly, facial recognition and profiling and the ability to use that information for criminal purposes to try and get ahead of the crime, if you like, that sort of thing it will be heavily regulated and probably will be banned if it hasn't been already. So there are moves. It has been recognised that AI, these things are machines, and they could create as many problems as they solve.
And the people using them, as well as the people developing them, must understand what they're doing with them and have a defensible position in relation to the use of them. So for those of you who are particularly nerdy, I strongly recommend you read Article 29.1 of the proposed regulation, which in an unparalleled system I've never seen in any other regulatory framework, says that the user of a high-risk AI system must only use that in accordance with the instructions for use. So you must understand what the AI system you've bought can do and only use it that way. So there is already an extraordinarily new degree of enthusiasm to regulate what people are doing with it. Now, that could easily go wrong, but the concept that you have to understand and defend what you're doing is pervasive in the new regulatory framework.
Okay, there is another question from JP around voracious appetite, AI's voracious appetite for data. Some say you have no privacy, right to privacy, get over it. Are they right? I think in a word, no. I think as we discussed just briefly there, the way that AI uses data, stores data, harvests data, all of those things will be heavily regulated, because at the end of the day, they are machines, and we as humans should not be beholden to a machine that makes a decision based on information that we have no idea whether that is right or it is wrong. So I think there will be a large amount of regulation around here. I mean, in existence in the GDPR anyway, computer-based decisions made by computers on data, you can challenge that, and I see no reason why that shouldn't continue through an AI perspective.
And for those of you enthusiastic about data and who have the opportunity to speak to competent authorities in relation to data, encourage them and the European Data Protection Board to publish guidelines about how they see these regulatory frameworks fitting with their regulatory framework, as opposed to the approach that they've adopted, particularly in clinical trials, which is galling. You just have to comply with both frameworks, you work it out, and we'll tell you after the fact if you got it wrong, but we won't tell you a priori how to go forward. So work with the regulators to try and find something that is logical and plausible, and then eventually AI systems will save us from the next pandemic.
And I agree with that, which at 14:59, 1 minute to 3 o'clock, brings us to the end of this seminar. There's a brief flyer, if you like, for the Bristows Life Sciences Summit in 2021, November 2021, where we continue to look at the implications and the use of AI in the medical sphere. It just remains for me to thank you, Alex, for your time, and to thank Jordan and everyone at Lexology for putting this on, and to thank everyone that has taken the time out to listen to us. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Ta-da.